Welcome to my live. What's your name? What can I call you by?
Ben.
Ben, nice to meet you. I'm Naomi. Hit me up. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I actually made a video in response to one of your videos a little less than a month ago concerning,
You did?
it was about, what was it, Bill HR 7688. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if
You want
you,
you want to talk about gas prices?
yeah, well, the video specifically and how you were pretending that being against a price control bill is somehow a bad thing.
So essentially, the bill was designed to prohibit market manipulation. It's not the same thing as a price like a price ceiling kind of thing. Essentially, the reason why gas prices have been so high lately was that refineries were intentionally lowering their output capacity to reduce the supply, such in order to create a deadweight loss that benefited the oligopolical gas companies. They were colluding to do this, and this harms us all. So if we can, prohibit that kind of market manipulation, prohibit that kind of intentionally limiting supply, that's a good thing, which makes the market more functional, which eliminates that deadweight loss. Yeah.
Notification pop up. Uh, have you read the contents of HR six or whatever? You know what I'm talking about. HR 7688. Because it's like whenever you describe it, it sounds extremely vague.
I have read the bill. Why do you ask?
Well, because like I said, when you describe it, you sound really vague. You're just saying, "Oh, this is to prevent market manipulation." Well, how do you prevent market manipulation?
So essentially, what this bill enables is the president to declare a national emergency. And from that point, I mean, I'm sure he could assemble a team of advisors that can engage in the actions that would be necessary to stop that market manipulation. But yeah, no, that's the
Yeah,
broad idea.
like price controls.
Well, actually, if it's to eliminate a deadweight loss, you could use a price control as a way of essentially forcing the refineries to increase their output such that they produce at a capacity where it is profitable for them to do so under that price control. If you were to draw like the supply and demand curves, where it's like with the supply, they're currently producing too low on the supply, and they're charging more because of it, because the demand would be up there. If you put a price cap at the market equilibrium, they will now have to increase their supply in order to make profit, and that would eliminate the deadweight loss. You could do it that way. There are other ways if you could directly exert control over the refineries themselves.
If you read anything about price controls and know anything about price controls in relation to supply and demand graphs, then you would know that price controls inherently cause less demand. So I don't know how you can
No, that's
possibly
only if you set,
say,
hold up. That's only if you set a price control at the non-market equilibrium price. You would know that if you studied economics.
and you're claiming that the market price is somehow not the market price because you say so, which is a really dumb claim.
Well, do you know how oligopolies and collusion works?
You know how the market works?
Okay, this is
The
literal econ
market
101.
market price.
Oligopolies are inefficient and lead to deadweight losses for the same reason that monopolies do, because they intentionally lower supply such they can charge excess price, and they create a deadweight loss that benefits them and harms the consumer. This is econ 101 stuff. Do you remember the chapter on oligopolies?
Well, first of all, I'm going to need some sort of actual evidence of collusion. I'd love to see that. I know you don't have any, but I'd love to see it instead
We
of
know
just,
that refineries are intentionally lowering their
oh, we
output.
know it. We
Refineries have been
know it.
lowering their output relative to what they were before. The price of a barrel of oil has been lower than what it was before, yet the gas prices increased. We know this because of what the refineries are doing to lower output intentionally.
You can't just say we know there's collusion. If you're going to make a claim, you should prove it. Where's the collusion? Show the collusion. Show proof of it.
The collusion is that the refineries are intentionally lowering capacity. If they weren't colluding, they wouldn't have any reason to do so.
Could you show me any evidence of that? Intentionally lowering capacity just for the sake of raising prices? Any evidence? I mean, prices
You want
generally
evidence that
are in a
that oil refineries intentionally lowering capacity?
intentionally lowering capacity to drive up prices. I was very specific in that.
Let's see. I can certainly find some articles about the lowering refinery capacity
I
right
mean,
now.
I would have loved for you to already have an example off the top of your head because you were making the claim repeatedly. So I mean, doing research on the fly, I mean that kind of shows you were baselessly making the claim.
Okay, do you have a better solution? Like, I want to be clear. I don't think that like this bill is some kind of like perfect solution, but I think it's a step in the right direction. Being able to address market manipulation is a step in the right direction. I don't have to have every single detail, prepared to acknowledge that an imperfect solution can make things slightly better for everyone.
Well, I mean, that's the bill's definitely not the good idea. Any sort of thing that involves price controls. Cause your mistake when talking about oligopolies and market manipulation is that you're assuming just because you have an oligops, sorry, I can't say the freaking word, or a monopoly, that means you don't have a market equilibrium price, which absolutely isn't true, right? This is a very contested thing amongst different economic schools. In the typical neoclassical model, it's like, well, yeah, if you have a monopoly, then you're going to have monopoly prices. But that's not
Wait,
necessarily.
wait. Aren't we basing this on people acting in their own best interest? It is in the best interest of the oligopolies to collude. It is in the best interest of the monopolies to intentionally lower supply such that they increase their own profits at the cost of the consumer. Like if we're applying the model of people acting in their own best interest, absolutely they're going to collude and manipulate the market. Like that's one of the general assumptions of economics is that people are trying to act in their own best interest. And it is within the best interest of these monopolies and these oligopolies to manipulate the market.
Well, you're starting off with a reasonable assumption that people do what they deem in their best interest, but then you're making a huge leap that collusion is in someone's best interest because
It absolutely is.
not only does collusion risk antitrust laws, which we do currently have, but it also risks that one part of the cartel will actually not go along with the plan and end up lowering their prices and take away customers, which is something that's happened a lot in the past with cartels. It's a very common thing, which is why cartels want to try their best to have contracts and stuff, keeping the other members from actually going out and lowering their prices.
Well, if somebody breaks the cartel, they might generate some short-term profits, but in the long run, they've broken that trust relationship, and they can no longer engage in the overall colluded benefits. If they're acting their own self-interest in the long run, it absolutely makes the most sense to keep colluding. Once again, with this self-interest assumption, colluding in the long term is what's best for them.
No, that doesn't make any sense because if I break away from the cartel and I'm now getting more consumers and making more profit because of it, why would I suddenly want to go back to the cartel? How
Well,
does
no,
that?
here's the thing. Like you won't be able to get that colluded price anymore. Like you are going to break the cartel, and in the long run, like if you're going to compete fairly, you will make less profits than a cartel that's competing unfairly could. And so that's why, although you might be able to beat the cartel for a bit in the short run, once the cartel finds out, you are out of that cartel, and they will beat you in the long run.
Why would they beat you in the long run? There's no reason to think that. Unless they
That's
undersell you, in which that's a great thing, right? It's a great thing for all of us because now the cartel's underselling the person who's underselling them. Well, there you go. Built-in solution. I mean, you actually just made a really great argument in my favor.
No, that's not how it works in the long run though. Like essentially if the cartel is broken, you won't be able to make as much profits anymore. That hurts you in the long run. That's what I'm saying.
But you're not providing an actual reason for that. I mean, the reason you just gave, that's what it sounds like. The cartel will, what will they do? They'll undercut them? Good. That's great. Perfect. I mean, that's a great solution. They undercut
That's
them.
not what's
And
happening
now we're all
though.
paying
No,
them.
nobody's breaking the cartel. Gas
Well, there
prices
isn't
are
a
pretty
cartel.
are pretty stagnant in terms of, company to company. They are not violating that cartel.
Right, because there isn't a cartel. You falsely claimed there was a cartel. I'm just saying if there was a cartel, that's what would happen. And that's what's happened many times
Oh,
in the
there's
past.
absolutely a cartel. Come on. It's within their best interest to do so.
Then provide evidence for it.
It simply follows from it being within their best interest.
No, it doesn't. I already gave a reason why it's not in their best interest. I gave two, actually. One is you have to risk antitrust laws because cartels, at least in the US, are illegal. Those types of cartels, anyways. And Number two, you have to risk someone breaking the cartel and undercutting you. That's two reasons why it's not in your best interest, at least two.
So the number two we addressed because that's not within your best interest.
Right.
That's my whole claim is that it's not within your best interest to break the cartel. Now, as far as number one, I mean, like, it's pretty widely acknowledged that like there is an element of market manipulation in the price in the price of gasoline here. I mean, like, we have
No,
literally
there's not.
OPEC. Like, OPEC is setting prices such that it benefits all of them. Like, that's literally a cartel by definition.
Nobody's saying there's a cartel and manipulating price. Nobody thinks that. I haven't heard anybody claim that besides you. Like,
What do you
genuinely,
call OPEC then?
I doesn't even claim that.
Like, what do you call OPEC then?
OPEC isn't a cartel.
What are they?
How would they be a cartel?
Somebody that so a group of oil producers that collude together to set a price that benefits them all? Sure sounds like a cartel to me.
What?
That's what a cartel is.
Okay. That's
Like,
I
that's
don't know
literally what a cartel is by definition. They're colluding to increase all of their profits.
so you think this is all about OPEC? I thought you were talking about like U.S. companies.
Well, I mean, both are doing this. Like,
How
let's
are
be
we going to
honest.
regulate OPEC?
You were asking for like examples of cartels.
Oh, okay. Yeah. When I'm asking for examples of cartels in the exact instance where we're talking about the bill that Congress was trying to put through, then, OPEC is relevant. No, I was asking for proof of US cartels.
Proof of U.S. cartels? I mean,
Yeah.
like, why are gas prices the same when you go from gas station to gas
I
station?
mean, do you think we're going to regulate OPEC
We certainly could.
with HR 7688?
I mean, if we addressed market manipulation such that these people have to compete fairly,
Bill
that could
doesn't even
certainly
that.
help the consumer. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction. That's always been my claim.
I mean, it seemed like you were arguing that U.S. companies were in cartels because that's the only relevant thing that would be here, right? Because nothing in this bill would regulate OPEC. Like I said, they don't even mention OPEC once. You can go on there and search, do a word search. They don't talk about anything like that. This is focused on U.S. companies.
Well, if we're just talking about U.S. companies, then I think that the refineries reducing capacity is something that's worth addressing.
And nobody's reducing capacity because of
We literally know
the
that the
rate.
refineries are reducing capacity right now.
Whoa. You can't just focus on one part of my sentence. Nobody's lowering their capacity just to raise prices, just to have a decreased supply, right?
Why
That
are they lowering
you,
capacity then?
you can point to different reasons why someone might be lowering capacity. I mean, there's been a lot of different regulations that have been instilled since Biden's administration,
So
which increase
why
costs,
would the refineries be lowering capacity?
because there's a lot of new regulations that are increasing costs.
But if it's increasing costs, wouldn't they want to make more profit? So, like, why would they lower capacity?
Well, just because you have more capacity doesn't mean you're going to have increased profits.
Correct. When you lower capacity intentionally, you reduce the supply so you can gain a profit. You figured it out.
I didn't say that.
Wait, no, you said if they increase the refinery capacity, they're not going to gain profits. That's exactly the point.
No.
When they
That's not.
intentionally lower the refinery capacity, they get to steal profits by doing so.
But that's
They
literally not.
create a deadweight loss and steal profits.
That's not what I said, though.
Okay, so then why would
It's,
they lower, like, why else would they lower the capacity of the refinery?
well, for example, people might be investing money into other things because they realize right now gas is not a good long-term investment, right? Just because you're investing in something else doesn't mean the gas price is increasing
But
or
wait,
thing that's you're
why would
going.
that have to come at the cost of the refineries? The refineries could still operate at full capacity while investing some of their profits into you say, like, clean energy solutions for the future. You wouldn't have to lower your capacity at all in order to
Not
invest
not
in other technologies as well.
I'm not talking about reinvesting profits. I'm talking about reinvesting the actual capital.
I
Like
mean,
the
I don't. It doesn't really make sense for them to just like sell off their refinery. Like these are the kind of companies that have
okay.
wild profits that they can put them away in offshore bank accounts.
I
They
didn't
have
say
capital.
I didn't say anything about people selling refineries. See, like I can't even everything I say, you just bring up some straw man.
You said that they were like reducing capital and
Yeah, people
like
are
they were moving the capital to other places. Like that would involve shutting down refineries to some extent, right?
no. Capital can include money. It can include various capital goods, right? So if you have
But I'm
investment
specifically asking you about why would they lower the output of their refineries?
to put it into a more profitable industry, because right
You
now,
don't have to lower the output of your refinery to
yeah,
invest in other industries too. That's you don't have to do that.
I didn't say you have to do that, but that's clearly what people are doing.
Why do
I
you
mean,
have evidence that that's clearly what they're doing?
you argued that at the beginning that people are going to go after their self-interest. So if they see that gas is not a good long-term investment right now, they're going to make other long-term investments. And you're going to stop seeing those investments go into gas, and they're going to go into other places like solar energy, like wind energy. I mean, California
So
recently announced
I absolutely agree that they
of
could
gas
put their
in
investments into other places, but that
2025.
says nothing about their refinery capacity itself. Why would you like you don't have to lower the output of your refinery in order to start investing money into green energy. That doesn't make sense at all.
You can lower it. I mean, it seems
Okay,
like a
so
sensible
I
thing
agree
to do
that they can
to a
lower
more
it. The question is,
industry.
why are they lowering it? Not what else could they do with their money, but why are they lowering the refinery capacity?
Okay, in order to produce, you have to have inputting capital, which has costs, right? These costs come from somewhere, so someone's paying the cost. So if someone says, "Oh, looks like this isn't going to be a long-term investment," they're investing for the cost to eventually have an output and profits, right? So they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to put this somewhere else instead of putting it into this particular production," and that would mean they're having less inputs, so that would lower production. Very
But
simple.
why would they specifically lower the output of the refineries?
I just explained.
Like, is it are you saying it's more profitable for them to lower the output of the refineries?
Oh my goodness. I mean, yes, I am saying that, but I'm not saying to raise gas prices. You were arguing it's more profitable because you're raising gas prices. It's not what
Okay,
I
so
don't
you
try to get
acknowledge that it's more
the time.
profitable for them to lower the output of refineries. Do you acknowledge that lowering the output of refineries raises gas prices?
It can.
Well, it certainly
It's
does. If
not
you
a general
reduce the
rule.
supply, the price is going to get higher, right?
It's not a general rule that that's going to happen, right? Because we saw gas prices in the last couple of months have actually decreased. We saw them increase
Right. But you
while
know that when we lower supply, the price increases, right?
generally, yeah, it doesn't
So
always.
if they are lowering the output of the refineries, then as an effect, it is increasing the price of the gasoline. Now, I guess maybe we're just getting caught up lost in like what are the intentions of these companies, but so far we've established it is true that they are lowering the output of their refineries, and it is true that doing so raises the price of gasoline in a way that profits them and harms the consumer of gasoline.
Well, to be clear,
So
I'm not 100%.
doesn't that warrant market action being taken in order to eliminate that deadweight loss?
To be clear, I'm not 100% sure how much they're lowering production, right? I'm just trusting you on that one. Because you could be totally wrong about that one. You've been wrong about a couple other things. But if assuming that's true, right? I think what I said is completely reasonable and far more reasonable than what you asserted. Um, but no, I don't think
But
it's
wait. Doesn't
viable.
my point is let's ignore their intentions for now. Let's just acknowledge the fact that yes, they are lowering refinery capacity, and yes, lowering refinery capacity does increase the gasoline price such that the suppliers of gasoline generate more profits, but it creates a deadweight loss that's the burden of the consumer. So doesn't that warrant action so that we can eliminate the deadweight loss?
That still doesn't necessarily mean they're making more profits out of gasoline. I mean, actually, if you um, look at profits from a lot of these companies, they don't have unusually large profits compared to previous years. And but like I said,
Oil and
right
gas
now
is
we see
super profitable, let's be honest.
right now we see prices going down. So that completely doesn't fit in with your narrative. Like, why are prices going down right now?
I think that it certainly could be with like I guess like I don't know exactly all the factors in play. I know that there were some supply issues with like the whole Russia Ukraine, but we've stabilized some from that. I don't know exactly if the refineries have started increasing capacity a little bit. I actually don't know all the factors of the current situation, but I do know that lowering the output of a refinery would indeed create a deadweight loss, which benefits the suppliers and harms the consumer. And I think that that warrants market action to be taken, and that's what the bill enables.
But if lowering your capacity makes you more profits, why would they be raising capacity?
I don't know exactly like I said I don't know exactly all the factors that are going into the
Me
current gas
neither. But
price.
I think what you should acknowledge is, yeah, there are a lot of factors, and it's really crazy to make the initial assertions that you did without considering that. Like, I don't really know exactly everything that's happening either. I don't think we either of us do. I think I know a little bit more on some issues. Maybe you know more on some issues. But the fact of the matter is, we both don't really know everything that's happening, right? I'm just pointing out, if we just make basic observations, we can see certain theories don't seem to hold up.
I mean, I don't claim to know everything about like the gas situation, but it seems pretty obvious that like all of these greedy corporations would absolutely engage in shady practices that profit them. I mean, we know how they're willing to destroy the planet in terms of climate change just in order to make a quick buck. Like, I don't trust these corporations at all, and enabling the government to take action to eliminate deadweight loss, to put some reins on these corporations that do not have our best interest in mind, seems like a good step in the right direction.
Well, the thing is with that, if my theory was correct and people are actually lowering their capacity because of new regulations, which there've been a lot that have been introduced. I could go over some if you want me to, but um, then we see that it's government intervention that's causing these problems. So why think, oh, if we just add more government intervention to attack, some branch of the problem instead of going back to the root, like that just seems completely useless.
I mean, I think that we can certainly invest in green energy without necessarily having to harm our current infrastructures. It's certainly worthwhile to invest in these kinds of infrastructure in the long run, but those don't have to come at the cost of each other.
I mean, the fact is, if we're investing in things like solar and wind, that is going to come out of the cost of gas in one way or another, or it's going to come out of somewhere, right? I mean, it's not a very natural thing in the market right now to
But we
invest.
could certainly invest in these industries such that they will be posed to overtake other industries in the future. We can do so without destroying, say, without, say, like lowering the capacity of certain industries for the time being.
A different story, I would say, but that's a had a lot of its own problems. Our government has been very anti-nuclear for many years. So I mean, I think focusing on stuff like that instead of things like wind and solar, which can be very problematic in certain areas. I mean, it's not always sunny and not always windy, but nuclear
I
energy
mean,
is
to be
much
honest, I
safer,
think that
much
all of
more
these different
efficient.
alternative energies are worth investing into. The main deal with nuclear energy is it takes quite a bit of time in order for us to get that nuclear energy payout with things like recyclable reactors that are still actively being researched. But I think that absolutely all of these industries are worth investing into. I think that if we were to invest, money into infrastructure and science that develops things that will, give us this kind of competitive advantage, yeah, those are absolutely worthwhile investments in the long run. And I am pro nuclear energy as long as we have the appropriate time to invest in it. I think that a lot of people are concerned that with the amount of time it would take to properly invest in nuclear energy, we're going to be reaching the pretty much too late stage of climate change before that would really pan out. And so that's why there's a lot of focus on like solar and wind for the time being. But I think that we can invest in all of these, and that an energy efficient and clean and renewable solution of the future will likely revolve around solar and wind and nuclear and all of the above. And yeah, they're worth investing into.
Yeah, but I think that's still a bit of a bad narrative to spread about nuclear energy. Like, I mean, you can acknowledge that it's a bit more of a long-term investment, but that just means go for it, right? Like
That's
allow
exactly
people
what
to
I'm
go
saying.
for
I'm,
it.
I'm saying we should go for the long-term investment. Absolutely.
All right. My phone's about to die. I'm trying to plug it in, but I wanted to mention one more thing before I head off here, which is kind of unrelated. But I was in a live stream on here the other day, and I saw you. I know you do a lot of like debates on transgender issues, which I usually don't engage in myself. But
Hmm.
let's see. So there's this Cornell paper, right? I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
You talking about the systematic literature review?
Right. The
Yeah, what about
about
it?
56 56 papers in it, right? So I see a lot of problems with citing this as if it actually proves anything, right? Because if you look at like the individual studies in this literature review, most of them aren't even studies. A lot of them, a big chunk of them, are just online um, surveys from like
That's
LGBT
still a
websites.
study. Like let's be clear. You can learn things from even those. Like that is still a study.
I mean, maybe, but like a bunch of self-selected surveys from LGBT websites, I don't think you can pretend that's real science. I mean, sure, you can be like, but if you're gonna
I mean,
say, oh yes,
how
you
else
can
are you going
learn
to get
something
LGBT
from that.
people? I mean, you would need to look at LGBT websites to find LGBT people.
Yeah, but you can still have actual studies, actual control
Yes, and the
groups,
systematic
not
literature
having.
review also includes studies that assessed like populations, say like in precisely medical literature. Now, you do bring up a good point that when we look at these kinds of systematic literature reviews, studies have weaknesses. That's absolutely true. There's no such thing as the perfect study on any topic, but that's precisely why systematic literature reviews are so valuable. When we have study A has this certain weakness, but say study B didn't have that weakness, say it could be something like a confounding variable or different sample sizes or different methodologies. When we have all of these different approaches and all of these different populations, and yet again after again after again, we get the same results within slightly different populations, within slightly different, potential issues. Well, that means that the issues of certain studies are being accounted for by the resolving of those issues in other studies. And when this trend holds again and again and again, study after study after study, it shows that, yeah, that's what the overwhelming trend is. And that's why systematic literature reviews are precisely so helpful, because no study is perfect, and the strengths of studies overcome the weaknesses of others when we have a great collection of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fun word salad, but the fact of the matter is, not all systemic reviews are perfect or even close to it, right? You can still have very biased, uncomprehensive systemic reviews, or sorry, systematic reviews, right? I mean,
So
you can
they
run
looked at
into a lot.
every study which assessed the effect of gender transition on the mental health of trans people. Like that was their inclusion criteria. I don't think you can say that that's a biased inclusion criteria.
I think including a bunch of non-generalizable online surveys isn't a very good criteria, right? I mean,
But
just
when they
because
have the
you're going
exact
out
same
and
results as these studies which assessed
useless
physical
results, useless
populations,
results.
that shows that this trend holds in multiple
No, it
settings.
doesn't. It
That's why
doesn't.
it's really
No,
good to
come
look at the
on.
systematic literature reviews.
No, come on. You know this, right? You know you can't go and grab a bunch of online surveys that don't account for no confounding variables, that are self-selective. But like, there's nothing about these. There's nothing useful
So
whatsoever,
the point
right?
is
You
that
know
the point
this.
is that these surveys, their results are the same as the results of the longitudinal studies, and that's what's precisely interesting and worth acknowledging.
So leave them out and just look at the longitude. Look at the good studies.
I think that all of these studies have some value. It
No,
is
they
certainly the
don't.
case that
They
longitudinal studies have more value, but even if we're just looking at the longitudinal studies, study after study after study shows that gender transition is helpful for trans people. The trend holds, even if you're just looking at the longitudinal studies.
Then just look at them. Then why pull out all these? These are
I'm happy
completely
to cite
useless.
longitudinal studies if people are interested in them.
All right. So I am gonna get going, but there's a paper about the Cornell um, literature review if you want to look it up. It's called "Activist Driven Transgender Research Methods Are Reckless and Will Lead to Harms."
What's this?
It, that,
Who's this paper by? Like what? Where's this hosted?
um, You can find it on ResearchGate. It's by I don't know how to pronounce this name. Hacsi.
Can you give me the title again?
Activist-driven transgender research methods are reckless and will lead to harms. So this just goes over and applies various systemic review guidelines to this paper and shows how bad it is. And it actually argues that this will lead to harms for transgender people and for movements itself. But from what I understand, it's not an
Wait,
anti-transgender
is
paper.
this is just an opinion piece by an adjunct professor?
And it's a good one. So I just recommend reading over it and seeing some of the criticisms of this paper and why it's not very good to cite it. I mean, I would suggest just going through and breaking out the actual good studies and citing those individually, because I think it's very misleading to cite this Cornell systematic review as if it actually means anything.
Well, it absolutely does mean anything, because it shows that the trend holds again and again, and within this broad population of studies and surveys. That's the value of systematic literature reviews. I also have specific longitudinal studies that I think are very valuable and that show this exact same result, if that's what you're in particular interested in. But I mean, this just seems like this is an opinion piece. This isn't a study.
Replicated data is useless if you didn't
Wait,
have
like here's the thing. I have
sort of
study after study after study, including longitudinal studies that are peer reviewed, and all you have is an opinion piece by an adjunct.
So?
Well, I think that the overwhelming body of scientific literature is more valuable than the opinion piece of a single adjunct.
I think citing a bunch of intentionally citing a bunch of misleading information is pretty bad.
It's not misleading at all.
Yes,
What this shows is that the trend holds again and again and again, time after time, study after study, in different environments and different circumstances. That's valuable knowledge. Even if these surveys are imperfect, the fact that they have the exact same trend over and over and over again, that's valuable knowledge. And that trend affirms what is found in the longitudinal studies, that's valuable knowledge.
It doesn't matter at all. You can perform one good statistically rigorous study and then perform 50 terrible ones with no confounding variables.
Well, if only you had a statistically good study instead of just an opinion piece by an adjunct.
Okay,
do you have any studies?
You literally
which show
can't
that
even
wait, hold up. Do you have any studies which show that gender transition is harmful for trans people? Like, do you have any studies? All you presented is an opinion piece.
Can you engage in the criticisms instead of appealing to authority? No, but you won't. Replicated data only matters if it has any sort of statistical rigor. If you're just citing a bunch of online surveys which have no statistical value, it's useless. That's not how you replicate data. You know this. You can't
say that they have zero statistical value. I will absolutely agree that online surveys are not as valuable as longitudinal studies, but to say that they have absolutely no statistical value, that's disingenuous.
It has no statistical value. There's no confounding variables. These are self-chosen samples. There's nothing about these that's useful. There's no control groups, nothing. It's just online surveys. They're not.
We can learn things from online surveys, especially when the outcomes they show are replicable again and again and again. Yeah, we can learn things from that.
What are you learning?
And especially when their results are consistent with longitudinal studies, with medical research done on actual physical populations that have these confounding variables accounted for. When the trend holds in both cases, that provides strong evidence for the trend. That's why these systematic literature reviews are very, very solid, and we can learn things from them.
Non-generalizable studies are not useful. They're just not. You know this.
They're useful in conjunction with other studies, and that's the entire point of the SLR.
I have heard you directly criticize a study that was a survey of parents of transgender kids, and you disregard it. I'm pretty sure you have a video of this on your account, so people can actually go and see you criticizing this exact research method. You
No, no,
didn't
no. What
criticize
I'm
it because there wasn't
criticizing,
any
hold up, hold up. What
replication.
I'm
You criticized
criticizing,
it because
it,
of
what I,
nature.
no, no, no. That's not what I'm criticizing. It's not that they use surveys that I'm criticizing. What I'm criticizing is that if you want to survey a population, you should survey that population. It is not good research to survey their disapproving parents. That's not good research. If you were to survey the trans youth themselves in order to assess whether or not the rapid onset gender dysphoria hypothesis has validity, that would have more validity than surveying their disapproving parents. That is a biased sample size. Like that is a heavily biased sample, and it's not
So
even the population they want to study. They're trying to extrapolate about the population they want to study from their disapproving parents. That is very different.
so that's bias, but non-response bias isn't bias. And
I think that
self-selection.
non-response bias is real. However, there is
Very,
an extreme explicit bias in that rapid onset gender dysphoria study. Meanwhile, non-inclusion bias is a lot more mild, and also we have specifically longitudinal studies which account for these kinds of biases that have the exact same results, replicable results.
then just cite those. Stop citing the garbage research that you know you shouldn't be
It's
citing.
not garbage. We can cite both. Both are worthwhile.
I mean, you didn't even know, I don't think you even knew anything about all these studies that were in this Cornell paper, and you just cite it.
I am aware of some information about the studies in the Cornell paper. I don't need to know the precise details about every study to know that overwhelmingly the academic body of scientific literature follows this trend overwhelmingly.
The trend of non-random samples, self-selection bias, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I agree.
No,
All
the
of that's
trend of gender transition helping trans people, because there are longitudinal studies within that Cornell University systematic literature review.
so when you say no, you're saying they don't have a bunch of non-random samples. Is that what you're saying? I know you. I know you're not saying that.
What do you
No,
mean?
I'm right. You know I'm right.
Wait, what are you saying?
I'm saying consistently they have non-random samples. They have self-selection bias. They have no confounding variables. Consistently, that's what's consistent in all these papers that you're citing.
Well, within the surveys, sure, but not within the the longitudinal studies. And when these surveys and the longitudinal studies have the same results, that's an interesting discovery.
All right. I mean, well, you clearly don't care about science. You don't actually care about
I absolutely care
honest.
about
So
science. That's why
no,
I
you
think
don't.
it's important to look at all of the studies.
You only
Meanwhile,
care about it when it
the
agrees.
only piece of evidence you have cited is an opinion piece from an adjunct. You have not cited a single
So what?
study once.
What's wrong with the opinion piece? Can you give
Well,
me
I just don't think that a single
with it?
opinion piece is worth more than
Anything wrong?
a whole collection of peer-reviewed studies.
Is there anything wrong with it?
Actually,
It's
even an
literally
opinion piece is
criticizing
worth
this.
less than than say a single peer-reviewed longitudinal study. I would say that the peer-reviewed longitudinal study is worth more than a single opinion piece
Is
by
there
so
anything?
much more. But I have study after study after study.
Is there anything wrong with it?
Do you want me to
No,
just
there's
like
not.
read through the opinion piece right now?
Well, you shouldn't try to disregard something without actually reading
Well,
it
let's
and
see.
listening
The
to the
first
critics.
sentence. Let's read the first sentence. The current field of transgender medicine is like a reckless Wild West free-for-all in which activist clinicians run small, terribly biased observational studies and then spin narratives that seem to confirm the benefit. This does not sound like sound research by any means. This sounds like somebody who got triggered that trans people are being helped with medical transition, and then they're just trying to discredit them. Like
Are you
this is
disagreeing that these are
absolutely a
small,
biased opinion
terribly run?
piece. This is such a biased opinion piece. You can tell from the first sentence.
Are you disagreeing that these are? You literally agree. You literally conceded that the papers were biased. By the way, you said that they had sample bias. So I mean, saying, "Oh, well,
There's
this is
bias in everything. Come on, you know that.
oh, there's bias in everything." Okay, so yeah,
But
this
this
paper
opinion
is
piece
biased.
is extremely
Yeah.
explicitly biased. You can tell from the first sentence.
So what? You're not addressing any of the criticisms. You're consistently defending bad research for no reason, just because you
I'm
don't
not
want.
consistently defending bad research. What I'm pointing
You
out
are.
is that surveys and longitudinal studies have the exact same result, the exact same findings, and that is interesting.
So what?
It's interesting because it shows that this is replicable.
That's
It
not
gives
replicate.
greater evidence
You
for
don't replicate
replicability.
stuff. All right, think about this, right? Let's say I run this huge study with 50,000 people, and I have huge control groups and everything, and I find 50% of people love coffee and 50% of people hate coffee, and then I go over to a coffee shop and ask two people. No, that was that where I was leading. That didn't make any sense. But let's say I went to the coffee shop, found one person, and asked them, "Do you like coffee?" "Oh yeah, I like coffee." And then I go out of the coffee shop, find someone else. "Do you like coffee?" "Oh no, I don't like coffee." "Oh, I replicated the data." That's not how you replicate data, and you know this. You don't do it through
That
poor
is not
survey.
the same level of rigor which the Cornell Systematic Literature Review has gone through, and you know that. You know that that's not what even the surveys we're
It didn't
talking
go
about
through
are
any rigor.
better than that, and
Cornell
you know
is
that.
terrible. It didn't go through any rigor.
Didn't go through any rigor at all. Why are these studies peer reviewed then?
Who cares if they're peer reviewed? What is that?
You said they didn't go through any rigor, but they're peer reviewed. That's
You said
literally
the
rigor.
Oh my goodness. You said the Cornell went through rigor.
Yeah,
You didn't
because
say all
they
the
looked at
studies.
like peer reviewed studies. That's the point. Like
No,
they
just because
collect peer reviewed studies.
bro,
That's
bro, bro.
rigor.
Just because you go through and get something peer reviewed doesn't mean that someone's after the fact conclusion is correct.
That's shifting the goalpost. You said that there is no rigor, which is absolutely not true.
Yeah,
I'm aware
it
that
is.
peer review is not a perfect process, but when we have peer reviewed study after peer reviewed study after peer reviewed study, and we acknowledge that peer review
No
is
confounding
pretty
variables,
rigorous,
no
that
confounding
gives some
variables
consistent,
after non-random
replicable
variables.
knowledge that we can know now.
No confounding variables after non-random samples after et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Why do you keep criticizing the surveys with like you can't um what about like the longitudinal studies? Like you have not presented
I'm
any
not
kind of
criticizing.
salient criticism
I'm not.
for the longitudinal studies.
I'm not criticizing
Like
them.
if you
I
want to
never once criticized
keep
them.
criticizing like surveys, sure, surveys do have valid criticism you can levy against them. What about the longitudinal studies?
So stop citing the surveys. There you go. Easy. That's all I'm asking. That's literally all I'm asking. I don't care
What about
about.
the longitudinal studies?
I don't care. You can cite those all you want. All right. I haven't gone through and seeing my opinion on them, but at least at surface level, there's a lot more statistical rigor in them, and there was a lot more effort put into them. Not
There
all these
certainly
garbage.
is more rigor in the longitudinal studies.
Right. We
All I'm saying is that it's an interesting result when the more rigorous longitudinal studies and the less rigorous surveys have the same results. That's an interesting result, right?
but same results meaning what? The same
They
percentage.
both show that gender transition has a positive effect on the mental health of trans people. Both of them show this.
The same percentages. Like this one says, 76% positive effect. This one says 77, or this one says 99. Right, you're being very misleading in what replicating data actually means. It doesn't just mean you get the same basic
So
result, right? Like it's 51% on
you
one,
can't necessarily boil down every study into say a percentage of better mental health, because the precise way that you assess whether or not mental health has improved or gotten worse varies from study to study. It would depend on the specific outcome in which the study is trying to measure, but all of these studies used outcomes which are proxies for mental health.
but you understand what I was just saying, right? If you have one result that's like 51% positive and another result that's like 99% positive, they're still both positive technically, but those are very different results, right? Like that's not
Right, but
necessarily
can't
replicating
we
data.
conclude then that this is a positive that this has positive outcomes?
Maybe, sure, because you have some
That's the
statistical rigor
point.
that has
The
positive outcomes.
conclusion is what matters, and the conclusion is that yes, gender transition does have a positive effect on the mental health of trans people.
But you admit that the conclusion doesn't have to come from the surveys. Like I don't.
Sure,
I'm being
we can
extremely
derive
generous
that conclusion from longitudinal studies. I just think it's an interesting result that the oh my gosh, thank you, that the surveys confirm the result that the longitudinal studies also show. That's an interesting result.
but I'm being extremely generous here. You keep trying to jump back because you know it's a lot easier to defend more rigorous studies. You keep trying to jump back there when I haven't criticized them, right? I can grant you, oh yes, it does everything gives positive results to this, and it is positive. I could grant all of that to you, but that doesn't change my criticism. My criticism is you shouldn't be citing garbage research. It's that simple. Just don't cite garbage research. Like when someone's up here debating you,
I just
just
think it's
say,
disingenuous to say that surveys are complete garbage and that we can't learn anything from them. I think that's disingenuous.
I think it's disingenuous to call them studies and act like they actually mean something.
You can learn things from surveyed populations. That's absolutely true.
So I never said you can't learn anything. You keep having to jump to easily defendable positions because you can't actually address my criticisms.
I'm absolutely addressing your criticisms. You are calling them completely garbage and worthless, which that's just not true.
Yeah, if something doesn't have any confounding variables, doesn't have any random samples, anything like that, has no statistical rigor at all, none, which is what these have,
You do know
meaning
that even
they have a
surveys
total
do
of
have
zero.
statistical rigor, right?
Like what?
So they do statistical analysis on surveys. They do things
Well,
like
let's go. When I say,
p-value checking, hypothesis testing. They do all these kinds of statistical methods even on survey results. There
what,
is statistical rigor in these surveys. They acknowledge that the sampling process is not perfect, but there is statistical rigor that goes into these, and that's why we can learn some things from them.
well, saying not perfect is loaded language. It's far from perfect, right? Because no study's perfect. Everybody acknowledges that. Everybody with any sort of common sense or who knows anything about how research and science is actually done. Nobody would be like, oh yeah, this is,
Right. I agree that no study is perfect, which is
it's
precisely why we want
far
to look
from
at
perfect.
collections of studies.
It's very poor. That's what it should be labeled as. Not perfect, because that's loaded language. It's poor. But when I asked you about statistical rigor for surveys, I didn't mean surveys in general. Like, obviously, you can have more rigor with surveys, and there's various ways to do that. Like, sometimes people will add controls after the facts through synthetic analyses and stuff like that, right? But I'm talking about these specific ones.
What about these specific ones?
I asked for like the rigor in these.
I mean,
In
I know that they
like,
apply they apply statistical methods to even identify correlations that they find. But like essentially, like especially with these surveys, like they're not making like the claim that like there is necessarily like a causative effect from these like these surveys demonstrate say a causative effect. Maybe more so the longitudinal studies which would demonstrate a causative effect. Surveys simply identify correlations, and I think it is an interesting result that these surveys do show that gender transition is correlated with mental health with improving mental health.
but these aren't showing correlations. They're not showing meaningful correlations, anyways. They're showing correlations, but they're showing correlations in
The
non-random,
positive direction,
very
which is what
biased.
matters for the conclusion.
What?
Well, the correlations are in the positive direction of mental health, which is precisely what we're trying to assess, whether or not gender transition is positive or negative for trans people. And
But if
overwhelmingly so, it's positive.
but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a poor study. Just because it's pointing in one direction doesn't mean anything. Because it's done
It
poorly.
certainly means something. Studies like okay, I guess
Not a
like
lot. I mean, you could look at
how
it and
okay,
say, oh,
like
that's
we
interesting, but to cite it in any sort of academic setting or any sort of debate setting without actually being specific about what it is, no, you shouldn't do that. Absolutely shouldn't do that.
how do you think we could study something like in regards to like a psychological outcome like say I mean like there are psychological surveys that are used all the time in the field of psychology to assess whether or not people improve within certain conditions, and I think that we can learn some things from those. This is very analogous to that.
Well, it can be very difficult, of course, right? Because we have ethical issues, right? So in the case of like, okay, is transitioning going to improve someone's mental health? And in the cases of a lot of these, it's more so social transitioning. Like, I think the Bailey, Ellis, and McNeil papers mostly focus on like social transitioning rather than, um, or like social acceptance, like a support. I'm trying to read it right here. A
Both are worth
supportive
accepting, or
environment, right?
both are worth looking into. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So this one's it's a supportive environment. So in that case, it's like, well, if you want to have a control group, then you have to have a control group that's consistently going to have a non-supportive environment, and you have to keep them in that. Which you can't like force someone into a non-supportive environment and then make sure they stay that way for whatever the study period is, say 5 years or whatever. Like, technically you could build a control group for that, but it would be very difficult. In order to keep it consistent, you would have to violate ethics. And the same with like surgical transition. You'd have to have a group who's like, okay, we're transgender, and you have to say, well, you're not going to physically transition for the next 5 years while this
We
other
actually do have some studies that were able to assess people that wanted to receive like a trans affirming surgery, but were not able to, versus people that did want to receive the surgery and did receive the surgery. We actually do have some studies that did assess that in particular, and they found positive results in terms of those that, out of all those that wanted the surgery, those that actually got the surgery did have positive outcomes in terms of mental health and stuff.
Right, and if in those cases, I would say that's much better, right? And I'm not saying like it's impossible to do all these, like what I mentioned earlier. It's very difficult to actually gather that group, and then keep it consistent without violating ethics. And if you do get it, then great. I mean, that's perfect. But I'm just saying, like, it's inherently a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I certainly would agree that's inherently a very difficult thing to do. But we do have those studies, and I will certainly agree that those studies are the strongest pieces of evidence that we do have. I guess like I just think that it still is worthwhile to look at surveys too.
I mean, if you want to look at surveys all you want, then go ahead. But I strongly recommend not using them in debates, right? I would say pull out the strongest studies to support your claim, and then explain it to. I think we both know most people don't really understand how research papers and stuff works, and it's very easy to take advantage of people and just throwing stuff out there because they have no idea how to argue that. Most people are just going to resort to, oh well, that's false because I said so, because it disagrees with me, right? So I
Well,
think
sure, but
it's
when the
good
when
to
the
just
when
bear
the
as
surveys
possible.
I'm citing have the same results as the longitudinal studies I'm citing, I don't think that there's anything disingenuous about citing both,
But I
because
think
the
I
conclusions we draw from those studies will
agree.
be the same, regardless if we're talking about those surveys and the longitudinal studies. That's why I think it's fine to cite, say, the systematic literature reviews. It's actually a good thing that even within a more diverse body of research, we have the same replicable results. That just adds more diversity and more validity to your research when we have all these different methodologies that still find the same results.
Yeah, I still completely disagree with that, obviously. But I mean, if you
Now,
don't want to,
I actually would agree. Now, I think that there are certain circumstances where I would agree. Say like we had a collection of studies which found that there were, or say we had a collection of say surveys which found that there were negative outcomes. Meanwhile, a collection of longitudinal studies which found positive outcomes. In that case, I think that when we have these, overwhelmingly mixed results, we should look at the most rigorous studies. Meanwhile, when the results are overwhelmingly clear in one direction, yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that this even holds in the lower quality surveys as well.
well, you should always look at the more rigorous studies.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I would agree with that take that you just gave, but I think you have to hold that consistent, even if the surveys agree with you. Like, I would never go and cite
Absolutely.
surveys.
If the overwhelming body of longitudinal studies showed that like gender transition is like harming trans people, then I wouldn't advocate for it. But that's just not the case.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying, like, it's a good idea to be fair to people and not cite poor research in defense of your position. I think it's fair to both the people who agree and disagree with you.
But I'm not citing bad research.
I mean, think about
I'm
this,
I'm
right?
citing the overwhelming body of research.
You know a little bit more about studies and stuff than the average person would, right? Think about, you might have some fan who watches your debates and goes, "Oh, she cites this paper, in this with these people, and it works, right?" And they go and do the same thing, and just because they saw you do it, not because they really know what they're talking about. And then they meet somebody who maybe takes stats, who maybe knows what they're talking about, maybe goes and watches debates from. I'm sure you're familiar with people. You might be familiar with people like Sean Last, who debate the opposite position as you, and also know a lot about research, right? They go get in a debate with someone like that, they're going to get totally screwed because that person has to do is tear apart that stuff, and they're not going to know how to defend it. Which I don't think you know how to defend it either. I don't think your defense is very good, but it's especially not going to be good coming from someone who has no clue what they're talking about. So just based on that, I think it's a very, just in defense of your own side, I think it's very good to not cite those sort of things, because you're just going to put other people who aren't you into bad positions.
I disagree. I think that systematic literature reviews are worth looking into, as I've argued throughout this specific topic, simply because when we collect the most diverse body of studies we can, of varying levels of quality, the strongest studies showing that their results are replicated again and again and again within all these different environments, that is a very important and worthwhile result to find out. And that's precisely why the systematic literature reviews are worthwhile. And this is why the academic community values systematic literature reviews. I think that I don't think that your criticisms like detract from the systematic literature reviews. Like, the systematic literature reviews hold, especially when they find an overwhelming trend, which they do in terms of trans people.
I just gave a very, very reasonable critique of it, and like pointed out that you could potentially put other people into positions that would hurt your cause, and you still don't want to like engage with it, or seem to
No,
actually
I think that they should be able
engage
to
at all.
understand why systematic literature reviews are the academic gold standard for these kinds of analyses. And yeah, I absolutely talk about that a lot in my live, where specifically why systematic literature reviews are so valuable. And I would hope that they would understand that if they were going into these kinds of situations. I actually don't advocate for people to just debate if they're not if they're not like trained in rhetoric. I think that it's often not a good outcome if you're going to like try to debate people, and like you don't have like any kind of like rhetorical skills.
All right, I mean, if you want to keep like peddling bad research out there, that's on you. But I've tried. Have
You
a
know,
good.
I'm not peddling bad research.
You are.
I'm
You admit
specifically
it.
pointing out that systematic literature reviews are the academic gold standard precisely because the strengths of certain studies overcome the weaknesses of others. That's precisely why these are so valuable. That's not bad
Yeah,
research.
you're
That's
literally
good research.
word
Pointing
salads.
out that this overwhelming trend
Like,
holds again and again and again is good research.
as in, okay. Citing things with no confounding variables and non-random samples is good research. Sure. Okay. All right. Well, have a good night.
That's I'm saying is precisely good research. What I'm saying is good research is showing that this overwhelming trend holds in study after study after study. That's the good research. The good research is coming to consensus, and that's why systematic literature reviews are valuable, because they demonstrate consensus.